In the middle of 2019 I had a very unusual Retina 3C camera sent to me to service. It turned out that it didn't actually have a xenon lens at all. It had a Xenar lens. Somebody had put in the shutter from a Retina 1B camera. So there were various things that needed to be done in order to make a good functioning camera out of it, including making sure I had the appropriate focus scale and making sure the rangefinder actually matched the focus of that particular lens. The project went quite well and the camera went back to its owner and all was good. Unfortunately, fairly recently the owner had a little accident with it and contacted me and said that the rewind knob had snapped off and he couldn't rewind the film. And we had a bit of discussion about that, and the upshot was I said, well, just send the camera here. I had a fairly good idea. The screw on the top of the rewind knob had snapped off, and it's only a 3mm brass screw, and I thought, well, that won't be too hard to deal with. I'll get the film rewound back into the cartridge, get that processed for him, and just replace that screw and all will be good. But that really wasn't what I found. Let's have a look at this. The whole top here has been somewhat munched in. The glass is broken. The case is quite distorted. And coming to the other end, I noticed that the flap on the meter is no good here. The hinge point is broken on the housing, so the meter's going to need probably a new housing. The meter does actually work apart from that. You can see a big crease across the flap here, so the flap's been damaged, and generally it's going to be a bit of a nuisance. I don't know what I'm going to discover inside here. I can see that the viewfinder glass is broken. I don't know if there's any damage to the rangefinder under there. So all of this remains to be discovered. But my first task here is to rewind the film. Now, that I can see that the outer shaft there is probably lifted out of the cassette at the moment. Yeah, it is. I'll just push it back down slightly. I've got to grip this and rotate it to wind the film back into the cassette. I can see that the rewind button's been handily pressed and ready to go. But that's my first problem. I don't really want to remove the top cover. I'm not sure whether that will cause me a potential light leak problem or not, but I do have to grip this somehow and unscrew it. I'll have a quick poke at that screw. If I can back that screw out, then I can screw the knob straight back on and will be as good as gold. I can get the film rolled back into the cartridge. I'll investigate that first perhaps. So I'll see if I can encourage that screw out, what's left of it. No, it won't. But I might be able to jam the screwdriver down there and use that to rewind the film. Rewind button's in, isn't it? Let's see what we can do. Oh, that screw wants to come loose now. Let's see if I can encourage that back out the hole then. It looks like it's going to come. A pair of tweezers, I think. Not quite enough sticking out for me to get my fingers onto that. But now there is. Okay, let's find a screw, put the knob back on. I see that the film speed scale has popped off here. Let's get the remains of this screw out anyway. And see if I've got a match in my spare parts. Something at the right length. That looks like it. Okay, there's the knob back together temporarily. Let's see if that'll spin in there. It will. And I can rewind that film completely. Well, given the amount of, it's a 36 shot film, it must have been right near the end of the film when this went. There we go. Right back into the cassette. Now I can open the camera and remove the film. June 19 was the date for the repair. Okay, well that's stage one pretty much dealt with, because that's the first task I needed to do, was to get the film out. Stage two, let's take the top off and see how much damage there is. Now I noticed that the collar's missing from the top of the, there's usually a collar on the top of the rewind shaft there, that's missing entirely. That's not a good start. Just remove that little snake chain, that's not doing anything particularly useful. One screw at the end of the top housing. Two screws under the rewind knob here on the top housing. This is an unusual top cover. It's very shiny chrome. That's not normal production. That was probably a replacement of some sort. Okay, so that's our top cover off. I already know that my meter is damaged, and there are small chips of glass floating around in here, which probably came from that viewfinder window, I would think. Let's just take that extraneous stuff off the top. And yes, there's another chip of glass here. I've got to be very careful with this, because I had a camera here recently that was entirely jammed up because a piece of glass had got loose. Okay, I'll blow that glass dust away. There's little fragments lying around loose here. I don't want them getting in the mechanism. Now I want to assess the state of the camera generally to see if there's any other serious issues. So I'll just pop that screw back in the strap plug there. and I'm checking the film advance function. That's very stiff. Yeah, no, there's serious problems there. There's something that maybe that there's another piece of glass in somewhere. That was very stiff, that action. The rewind shaft, you can see, is bent. It's pushed right over to one side. So that the bush on there is probably damaged. Will need to be straightened up. Now, whatever ailed that film advance seems to have gone. So it must have been another chip of glass that was in there, and it's now found its way out. So the film advance is moving correctly. The shutter's cocking and firing correctly. I know I'm going to have to straighten up this rewind shaft here because the bush must be bent. But I'm just going to check the rangefinder, see what it looks like. It's out of alignment. Something has taken a hit. I very much suspect that the front group here on the rangefinder has been pushed across. It's locked in place with a touch of lacquer, but I don't think that was enough to protect it. Well, that being the case, I will certainly remove the rangefinder so I've got better access to this rewind shaft. 2 screws hold the rangefinder in position. You can see the lacquer I've used here to stop the rangefinder from shifting on the body, and there's another chip of glass from that viewfinder window. Let's get rid of that. I'll remove the strap lug because I can see that that's bent. And I'll remove the rewind bush. That might be as deep as I have to go into this. It's looking very promising. I will do the owner a favour and heat this up with our hairdryer to soften the adhesive on this tape. Some electrical tape's been used to stick as film reminder on the back door, but that is likely to lift the leatherette if that's used, so I'm going to remove that for the owner, do them a little favour. The rangefinder itself, I'll check that out. I'll see what it looks like as a standalone unit. The adjustment's certainly slightly out. It was probably caused by the front group here being pushed across to one side in the shock. And the exposure meter, it's a working exposure meter, but the housing's broken. You can probably see that it's snapped off here and it's all pushed in at this point. Well, that's a shame, but I can probably find a new housing and hope to transfer the mechanism from this meter into a new housing and then put it back on the camera. What other problems have I got? Well, this top cover, obviously. This is not pretty. Strangely, because it's a shinier chrome, it's probably going to be easier to panel beat than if it had been satin chrome without leaving any marks. So this, I'll remove the shoe. I'm going to have to go down and use my compressor to blow the camera out. I want to make sure I've got rid of all of the tiny fragments of glass in this camera, because I can certainly see some loose inside the top cover here. There's another piece that fell out, but there's tiny sparkles down here. That's all glass. I'll need rid of that. It just acts like sand, it'll just jam things up. I'll remove that little bracket that holds the glass in for the viewfinder at that end. And my task now is panel beating. I've got to get this top cover back into shape. There's no danger it's going to come out unmarked, but I'll probably be able to reduce the number of marks that are on it. There's quite a pronounced dent in the surface right there, and that will certainly stay. But I think I can probably flatten out these parts and get them looking quite presentable. The meter dial here, that's sheared off. There are two little screws in there. One of them's loose and one of them is pulled right through. So that's going to have to come off, and I'm going to have to find a replacement for that damaged screw. So, what can I tell from this? Well, I can tell that it wasn't a simple case of the camera dropping and the rewind knob hitting the ground and that was it. Given that we've got marked damage at this point, the camera must have tumbled along the ground. So it didn't fall off someone's lap, it's tumbled, had quite a big tumble down the hill, I'd say. To be quite honest, we're probably lucky there are as fewer marks on here as there are. However, I have to exercise my panel beating skills and see what I can do.